Okay, I guess we can begin. Tonight is our third session in Halacha Taaruvot, Siman Het. We've gone through an introduction about many terms, and we began to discuss Seif Aleph in the Mechaber. Since tonight is Thursday, as opposed to Tuesday, what I would like to do initially is a quick review of some of the main ideas that we've covered last week, or actually covered this week, the beginning of the week, and then talk about some additional points and pretty much summarize what is going on in this Seif before we go on to the next one. Three important concepts that we have to have in mind as we proceed. One is tam ke'ikar. Tam ke'ikar, it means that the flavoring of an isur poses a problem in the same way that the ikar of the isur. All we have is the flavoring. You actually may have more than just the flavoring. You may have the entire isur that has just melted away. And that makes a difference according to certain shitot, whether you have the entire isur but you just don't see it, or all you really have is the flavoring that was left behind from the isur that is no longer there, that was removed. Yes.
If it's melted, if there's a shitot
that would make a difference.
That transforms the entire into an isur, or
yes. In other words, it will make a difference whether you have the entire isur there,
right,
or all you have is the flavor.
Right.
But even according to those who hold that tam ke'ikar is the oraita, for example,
right.
You don't necessarily have to have the whole isur. The flavoring has the ability to transform the heter into isur. Especially when you think about it, the flavor is something that spreads out everywhere. It basically takes over. And in the same way that bitul works to make something asur mutter, there's a bitul here that can happen that will make that which is mutter asur. Did I say that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
finally, you're
Right.
saying even if the right, so
That's correct.
or
Yeah.
even absent altogether,
Altogether,
but the
yeah.
taste present,
the taste is present.
then that taste alone by itself, even without any substance, can render the permitted food
Right.
asur.
Right, exactly. Now there are some opinions, and instead of getting into names of all the shitas, which is a little difficult to keep track of, there are quite a few. There are those who hold that there's no such a thing as the isur hijacking the whole heter and making it all isur.
Right.
The isur is there, yes, and that makes a difference whether you have bichdei achilat pras or not. Bichdei achilat pras is a term, an important term that's used in halacha quite a bit. That if you have a certain amount or within a certain amount of time, an isur within a certain amount of mixture, it's not entirely diluted. In other words, it's within a certain amount of food called achilat pras, and therefore its existence is there. We deem it to exist, as opposed to if it's in a larger quantity, it's so diluted that unless you were to eat the entire thing, like the Rambam holds, you would not be eating an entire kazait
Right.
of the isur.
Right.
So we find from the various shitot that even though tam ke'ikar is something to reckon with, it has to be. We need to know if it's the Rabban or the Oraita, and that's going to make a difference when there is a suffix. And suffix is what we'll be talking about a lot in the Taaruvot, just like in Basar b'chalav too. Suffix, and if it's a suffix the Oraita or a suffix the Rabban, it can make a big difference. So this is basically something that is discussed at length. Tam ke'ikar is a big sugya, because if you look at the Gemara, whether it's in Masechet Chulin or Masechet Avodah Zarah, where these issues appear, it's not so clear what the Gemara was talking about when it says this is ta'amo velo mamasho, or this is ta'amo en mamasho. That is a little bit. That is why we have machloket or different opinion between Rashi and Tosafot and everybody else, because it's not always clear. We'd love things to be clear, then everybody would be pretty much in agreement.
Right.
But when you have Rashi saying one thing and Tosafot saying, how could they be saying something completely different? Right? They're interpreting the Gemara. They're commentaries and interpreting the Gemara, and it could go either way. So we have to consider these shitot.
Can you give a question? Like, for example,
I will soon. I will give an example of the various shitot. I will in a moment. Yeah, but that is the sugya of tam ke'ikar. That it's important to have in mind the various opinions as to what exactly is happening in this mixture. This also came about in a different way in Basar v'chalav, for those of you who learned about Hanan, Chatichat Naset Nevela, which also involves flavor, but one step beyond affecting that one piece that is absorbing the flavor. The flavor over there affects one piece of meat, as an example, and then that piece of meat falls into another pot, and now we say, okay, that's easy. I'm just going to see if there's 60 times as much as the flavor that is originally asur. Comes along this concept or term of Hanan, Chatichat Naset Nevela, that tells us, no. That original piece perhaps becomes Nevela all by itself. And it's this big, right? Now you need 60 times against it, right? Or not. So in Basar v'chalav, everybody agrees it's a problem because you have a mixture of the two. That's the way the Torah forbids it. But whoever tells you that the whole piece becomes a nevela just because it in itself became asur because of the flavor. The flavor didn't change. So you see, that's another example of flavor affecting, but one step beyond the affecting the pot. It affects the shiur that you now need to cancel out this other piece of meat. Okay, but that's something that was already discussed. We went into a little bit into the concept of bitul. We haven't covered all the aspects of bitul yet, because there's different kinds of bitul. It all depends what you're dealing with. As we will soon see, is it min b'mino? Is it min b'she'eno mino? Are there two kinds of foods, the same type? Are they different? Is it lach belach? Is it lach beyavesh? Is it liquid and solids and solids, liquids and liquids? Right? It all depends what you're dealing with, and the rules are slightly different. And some of the rules are going to be midrabanan, not necessarily doraita. Now, because even though tam ki'ikar is something so important, where do you have that? When you have liquids, or when you have two different kinds of foods that you may eventually cook. So you may have the flavoring of one into the other. But when you have things of the same type, right? Or it's all completely dry, you don't have the flavor, that's not an issue.
How do you define this?
Two kinds of, we'll talk about that in the next scene, okay? But for the time being, two types of the same thing, two meats, right? And even though meat and liver are different, some would say it's the same thing, okay? All right, so we'll get to that. That's a good question. How do we define the same type? When we come to it. So bitul is an important idea, because bitul is a solution to this mixture. Can we cancel it out, nullify it, or are we stuck with something? A caterer is making a lot of food right now, right? He's going to feed 300 people, right? And somebody brought some non-kosher food and it was cooked together. I mean, this could pose big problems in hashgacha, right? It could pose problems in food items that you buy at the store that have a small amount of it. So you say, okay, it's batel. Should you have something that's batel lechatchila? See what I mean? So bitul is something that we need to understand, and we'll be talking about it more at length, how it works. And briefly, the way it works is somehow it cancels out the other. If we're talking about bitul isur, it cancels out the isur as long as there is at least a majority. And that majority idea we learn from Achrei Rabim Lehatot, according to most opinions. The pasuk Achrei Rabim Lehatot, you go by the majority, applies in many areas, not only in food. It applies in court, even though it's a little difficult to comprehend. Why is it difficult to comprehend? Because when it comes to a majority of judges, what does the law of majority tell you? It tells you that, let's say you have 11, okay? And 7 say one thing and 4 say something else. What are we saying? We're saying that the 4 don't count. The 4 are canceled out. They don't count. They don't, as though they don't exist. That's the idea behind rov in court, rov in opinions. They don't count. Achrei Rabim Lehatot, you go by the majority. That majority has decided the din or the halacha, or the judgment. But to apply Achrei Rabim Lehatot in bitul is difficult to say, even though that's the Rashi seems to be saying that's the source. Why is it difficult? Because what are we saying? We're saying, this non-kosher hot dog that's mixed within the kosher hot dogs is not there. But I know for a fact that it is. Could I use the same logic that I used in court with judges with hot dogs? Over there I said their opinions don't count. It's as though they never expressed it. they don't exist. Could I say that about a hot dog too? It's there. Can I say it doesn't exist? Well, towards the end of the shiur, I'll tell you what the Kabbalah has to say about this, which I don't think you'll ever hear in any shiur. We're not learning Kabbalah here, but then if we have time, we'll get into that. Yeah, but it's interesting because based on this logic, if it's still there, well, how can I eat it? Elamai, what do we say? There's something here that happens that transforms the Isur into Heter, as the Rosh says. Now it's mutter, which is hard to understand. Or the other opinions who say it's not being really transformed, I cannot eat it all at the same time. I can only grab one at a time, and when I do so, I'm assuming I'm taking the kosher one statistically. Because Rov means statistics. Statistics is easy to comprehend. If I take 1 out of 3, the one probably belongs to the majority. And in Halacha Taaruvot, B'ezrat Hashem, later on, we'll be talking about something called ruba, various kinds of ruba, majority that are there at all times. You have many, many stores, and you have an idea of kol de parish, miruba parish, all kinds of concepts of not a mixture per se, but something that came from many. Where did it come from? From the non-kosher store or from the kosher store? The kosher butcher, the non-kosher butcher, right? So that's different because you can apply statistics, you can apply the rov, and that makes a lot more sense than saying all of it is kosher. How did that happen? Nevertheless, that's what happens in bitul. Now, in the solids it's difficult, but with lach, with liquids, it's a little easier to comprehend because what kind of a bitul do we need with liquids? We need to no longer feel the ta'am. That's it. Very simple. If ta'am is keikar, whether it's midrabanan doraita, fine. How am I going to get rid of it? Not intentionally, of course, but if it happened if there's going to be 60, as an example.
Not 60.
Okay.
How do we assume that at 60 we can no longer
So that's
taste
part of another shiur
Okay.
that we went over, that we learned that out from Zroa B'Shela. The Gemara learns this out, right? So all kinds of shiurim, by the way, are halacha leMoshe Misinai. Bitul, how much is needed, is also a certain halacha. Nobody just made it up, right? It turns out that for the most part, shishim, 60, will be sufficient for most flavors to not be felt. And that's what we're going to be spending a few minutes now about this shiur of shishim, how it works according to the various shitot. Because we spoke about another form of bitul, that it's not by amount, but it's by the use of a kafela, or kapela, which is a chef, a cook, an individual who is somewhat familiar with tastes and flavors, who's not Jewish, of course. Otherwise, if he was Jewish, he wouldn't be able to taste if there's any milk in this meat, or if there's any nevilah here, right? It's asur, right? So we can employ his services, which led to the other topic, a very important topic that we spent most of our time discussing on Tuesday, is how do we trust the goy? So in review of that point, real quickly, this is a major issue. We usually don't trust the goy. A goy does not have ne'emanut. We learn it out, of course. This is all from Pesukim. We learn out who qualifies to be a witness and who not. And a goy does not. But the rabbis tell us that there are times that we can accept a goy's opinion, if he states a certain fact. When that fact helps us clarify a situation. Right. One of them is, of course, a guna. And that is a real big exception because even though it's talking about something that is min Torah, and when you're having prohibitions of a Torah nature, you definitely want to be extra careful. And since aguna is a situation where a woman needs a tremendous amount of help to be able to remarry, figuring out what happened to her husband, the rabbis did not want to be too strict with what they expected or what they demanded as proof. Even though there's a lot of proof that is necessary. When you see a body, if you see it too many days after it died, it has decomposed beyond recognition. Believe it or not, depending, of course, on the climate, depending on the conditions of the soil, where you find it, if it's in water, forget it. It's going to be very difficult. Yeah, I think even the fingerprints are gone after a while. I mean, it's just, yeah.
But how about if he has a name next
That's
to it?
something else.
These things can help, but by themselves, they're not
determine
enough.
that.
Soldiers, these Israeli soldiers have these what are they called?
Dog tags.
Dog tags, yeah. I don't know why they call them dog tags.
Because tags that
Is that what it is?
pet
Yeah.
dog. It's
Oh,
a
okay.
terror,
Yeah, okay. Well, you've had a pet once
No.
before?
I mean,
okay. You
but-
know about
but
it.
I'm just
Okay.
I think I got it right.
Turn on that.
Yeah. Not by that by itself.
Oh, you didn't.
No. That's too easy. It could have been misplaced, yeah. But these things can help, yeah. So Aguna is definitely one of those examples where life can be very tough for a woman, and the rabbis made an exception. And the exception, by the way, does not mean that we just accept testimony by a goy. The rabbis explain that case in particular is not testimony. And if you see at all the examples in the Shulchan Aruch where a goy is being employed, it's not testimony. It's what we call a gilui milta. Especially in Isurim. In Isurim, it functions similar to an ed echad. One witness that cannot usually be used in the Torah. You usually need two. Ed echad ne'eman bi Isurim. So one witness can be used to determine if something is kosher or not. We trust one ed in certain situations that involve Isurim. And because of that, not that the goy is similar to him, but in concept, it's similar. That in certain situations, we will believe the goy. One of them is if he's mesiach lefi tumo, if he volunteers the information on his own. Basically, he's not aware that I need his help. I just ask him, or through a conversation, I get the information. It is something that I will be able to figure out anyway at some point, and therefore he has no incentive to lie. And we went on to other examples that are similar and are permissible because either the goy is mirtat, he's afraid, he's working for the Jew, or, as in the case of our halacha, according to the opinions that you need a kafela, or you can use, I should say, kafela to be able to determine if there's flavor here. He is a chef, he doesn't want to ruin his reputation, so that is a form of mirtat. We gave the example of halav Israel, halav akum. You have somebody going in and out, even though he's not the same. He's not there at all times. And you can have, by the way, this situation of yotzeh v'nichnas in restaurants. That even though some people want a mashgiach tmidi, constant, all the time there. In reality, you can have him going in and out, and it may be okay, depending what's involved, depending if they are familiar, depending on the relationship you have with them. And I have some use for you. I have some use for you that I've found out recently that some rabbis have permitted cameras. Now, this technology was not around before. And in Israel, they're using cameras, certain, not kitchens, but where they milk the cows.
Oh,
What do you call those places?
oh, dairy farms.
Dairy farms.
Right.
Yeah. Just because you don't have pig milk there, even though unfortunately there are some people raising pigs, which they shouldn't allow, but unfortunately that's what's happening today. They are in conjunction, of course, with in and out, checking occasionally, having that at all times there. What does that present? It presents a form of mirta too. They don't want to be caught on camera. Imagine if all the babysitters knew, some of them, they've been cameras, they wouldn't have done what they did. Some of them were caught abusing their senior citizen that they were watching, or the children that they were looking over. They didn't know that there was a hidden camera. So if they would know, they would behave differently. So there's no doubt that in these kind of situations, using a goy would be permissible because either there's no incentive to lie, or because he's afraid, or something in between. And therefore, in certain situations, the rabbis allowed it because of that, and it does not come under the category of testimony whatsoever.
A quick question,
Yeah.
because before we were
Yeah.
going to have to talk about this issue.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Your opinions actually that they're the team acting as a witness?
No, nobody holds that, no, because that would not be permissible.
So what you're saying that basically
It's not even testimony.
you're allowed to trust your wife that she made the choice in a way which is besides the fact that you love her and you've known her for years.
But
this
the only way to know is if you taste the chalot.
right.
That's the only that's the only way you'll really know she did it right.
Right. But basically, you're saying that her
You can trust her that she went to the mikveh.
Right.
If she tells you she did,
Yeah.
that she counted right, that she did everything right. Yes, that's the manas of an example of one individual.
Yeah.
Right. So, yes, in the case of Eidus Isha, one more time, the rabbis tell us, En goy masiach lefi tumo ne'eman b'isurei Torah, ela be'idut Isha.
So there it's Avis.
En goy masiach lefi tumo ne'eman, אלא בעדות אישה. Yeah, but what is his function? A goy mesiach lefi tumo.
Right.
He's not being me'id, even though he
fulfills
fulfills the role of that. He's basically
Right.
bringing testimony, even though technically it's not testimony.
The Beitin uses tumo as instead of a testimony.
Of testimony. We could not hire him. We cannot use his real testimony if he were to come.
If he comes before the Beitin and says, "I want to testify,"
Yes.
you wouldn't accept.
Yeah, no, I know the case. I was there. No, that would not be
But
acceptable.
since it's Mesiach Lefi Tumo, so
Yes.
this Mesiach Lefi Tumo is
raises
a
his-
valid replacement for
Yeah.
the required.
Right, because there's more credibility. That's the key word. The key word is credibility. Yeah.
In a Goyish court,
Yeah.
sometimes there are who are not directly involved in a case.
Right.
I guess they render a friend of the court or something like that. It's like maybe a law firm or something,
Okay.
like someone who's familiar with this type of a situation. They'll render an opinion about this situation.
Yeah,
It's
a
not-
professional.
It's
Yeah.
right, a professional. Right. It's not directly.
Yes, you're right. You're right. That's a good example,
Yeah.
and that's the example of kafela too,
Okay.
where we use his judgment.
You're talking about an expertness.
An expert
right.
witness.
That's what I'm
You're
trying to
talking about an
say.
expert
Yeah.
witness?
I thought I was.
So the
Yes.
friend of the court?
Right.
Yeah, it's something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on. So now that we pretty much reviewed some of the ideas, we need to just perhaps better understand the mechaber as to why he chose to rely on a goy who's masiach lefi tumo. Even though generally it could be understood, and that's the way I started explaining it on Tuesday. It could be generally understood that the mechaber basically says a goy a kafela because that's the lashon of the Gemara. I mean, the lashon is basically go ahead and call a goy a kafela, one who knows a little bit of flavor. So it could be understood, and that's the way I actually read it. That's the way I actually explained it at the beginning of the shir, that we're talking about consulting with an experienced goy about his opinion if there's any flavor. But towards the end of the shir, I said that the chidush here is not just a goy. In the mechaber, the chidush is that he's really saying nothing about kafela at all. He's saying something much more of a chidush. You can use somebody who's not an expert. He's a mesiach lefi tumo. And he, of course, emphasizes the words and makes sure that you know that this goy, hu shelo yeh, tzarich shelo yeda shesomchim alav, that he knows that we're not relying on him. So, if you read the words carefully, the mechaber, he's not talking about kefela, and we asked about that last, Tuesday. Why doesn't he mention kefela, and where does he get this mesiach lefi tumo thing?
For example, would there be relying on, say, a chemical analysis? Would that have any bearing whatsoever on the halacha? If you can send a sample and have it chemically analyzed to see if there's cholav in this chicken soup or whatever.
That's an excellent question, and I'm sure it's come up, and they have dealt with it. The 20th and 21st century that we have that capability.
Right. But
And
probably does not.
we never have come. There's never been a need for that, and nobody's in the kitchen will have his little lab,
Right.
Right, and you need to know quickly the answer to this question. But in principle, I see no problem with that.
But it would not be edus. It would just be a riot. It would
Yeah,
be, right?
exactly. The same idea as with the kafela.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
It would be basically more sophisticated.
A sophisticated way of the term. Yes, exactly.
Right.
More sophisticated tongue. Yes.
I don't know all
Right.
the details, but Rabbi Elyahu
Yeah.
seems to genetic testing. And
Right. But that's
DNA,
not.
no.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. I don't know how he looks at it. Seems to hold.
Well,
that this
if
is
you
a bit
explain it
important.
well to him, I'm sure he can analyze it well.
No.
Yeah. But anyway, let's go on.
Yeah.
So the mechaber seems to be saying that we can rely even on something less than a kafela, and that's mesiach lefi tumo. So what I did not explain, even though we pretty much said it, where he takes it from, okay, the Rambam, the mechaber takes it from the Rambam. If you really want to know the real words of the mechaber, you have to look at the Bet Yosef. And in the Bet Yosef, as the Taz brings down, the Taz basically says that the reason the mechaber using the Rambam is not because he uses the Rambam regularly throughout his psakim, Rambam, Rif, Rosh. Not only because of that. Now this is interesting. The Taz clarifies this. The reason why the mechaber is using the Rambam here, he's telling us that even though I hold myself, tam ki ikar is deoraita, like those opinions who hold tam ki ikar is deoraita, and it's he doesn't say it in those words, but he says it pretty much in the Bet Yosef, and we will see it in the next seif. For those of you who asked on Tuesday, how do we know that the Mechaber holds tam ki ikar deoraita? You will see in the next seif, if you really want to see it in different words, that he basically says, if there is a mixture and it was spilled, and we don't know whether there was, how much there was, if it was enough to cancel, and it was min b'she'eno mino, guess what? You have to be machmir. If it's min b'mino, and there was at least rov, great. Rov is enough, min b'mino. But min b'she'eno mino, where you need at least 60, otherwise it's not good, you can't use rov, the mechaber is machmir, and a suffix. A rov will not be enough. That's where you also know that he holds tam keika deoraita. Otherwise, why would it be machmir? Suffix derabbanon lekula. Suffix deoraita is lechumra.
And he's actually.
So okay. So he talks about it in the Bet Yosef, but you can see from that halacha that that's what he holds to. Exactly. Yeah. But the Taz, I like the way the Taz says it. The Taz says that the mechaber is going to use Mesiach Lefi Tumo because he relies on the Rambam and Rashi. That what? The tam kikar is derabanan. In other words, I just told you on Tuesday, the Rambam takes Mesiach Lefi Tumo from the Rambam. That's the Mechaber takes Mesiach Lefi Tumo from the Rambam because that's what the Rambam writes. The Rambam writes even more than that. He doesn't even have to be Mesiach Lefi Tumo. You can ask the goy straight out. Listen, I need to know if there is this flavor in here or not. You can actually know Mesiach Lefi Tumo. The Rambam doesn't even say Mesiach Lefi Tumo. So the Mechaber says, great, I can rely on the Rambam. I use the Rambam all the time. Okay? But no, the Taz says, you know what? The Mechaber really is using the Rambam for another reason. Even though he holds Tam Ki'ikar Doraita, he says, but since the Rambam, Rashi, hold Tam Ki'ikar as the Rabbanan, we can rely on them too.
That is a
Wait, one more time.
We can also rely on them in this situation of kafela.
Oh, I see.
You see what I mean?
But he holds,
Yeah.
the Ikar then holds that it's Doraisa. But since
By the way, the way I discovered that, I didn't really see it right away, was from the notes. Look at the notes if you have them, and where that argument is being used. That it's not just because the Mechaber follows the Rambam, which he does many, many times. Here, it's something else. Because the big question on the Mechaber was what? The big question was, if what we said before is true, that you rarely use a goy in Isurei Deoraita except for Edut Isha, when a woman is an aguna, then you can rely because of an exception at Takanat Chazal. This is an Isur Torah too, according to the ones at least who hold Tam Ki'ikar Deoraita. Remember that?
Right.
We said that the two are connected. Perhaps those who hold Tam Ki'ikar Deoraita would not allow this situation, unless it's a kafela, which is a big chidush, because he's afraid of his reputation. But a Mesiach Lefi Tumo, why would this case be any different than any other case? How would you allow a goy Mesiach Lefi Tumo in a case where Tam Ki'ikar is Deoraita? It's an Isur Deoraita here. So the Taz, the way I understood, the way the Taz explains it, is the Mechaber will say, we can rely on the Rambam and Rashi who say Tam Ki'ikar is Derabanan in using a kafela. In other words, the reason why we're using a kafela here for Nisur Deoraita is because there are other opinions who hold Tam Ki'ikar as Derabanan. That's all. Whoever said it's a real Deoraita? It's not so clear. It's a machloket. Interesting. Right?
and since we don't know,
Yeah.
so we're allowed to use
What is it that we don't?
whether it's Doraisa or whether.
No, we know. It depends who you follow.
Right,
So
okay.
yeah.
Right.
Right. But so you see, but that's the point.
No, the interesting thing is the Mechaber holds it is Doraita.
It is.
But with respect to permitting Mesiach Lefi Tumo, he accepts the opinion of those that hold.
We can rely on them
Doraita.
too. So that's at least the way you can read from the Bet Yosef, by the way. If you read the Bet Yosef, I mean, it's pretty much apparent that that's what he's saying. They say so, and we could use them too.
How does he contradict?
He's not really contradicting
He's
because,
saying that
yeah,
there are others who hold the
because
other way.
many hold that it's Deoraita. Tam Ki'ikar Deoraita, many hold. But the Rambam, Rashi, we can't just discount them. Right? They hold like those that say it's the Rabbanan.
And he's not ruling here that Tam Ki'ikar is Rabbanan.
No.
He's just following an opinion regarding
Yeah.
a side issue.
Yeah.
that is based on that.
And this is actually a very important point, an interesting point in Shulchan Aruch Bechalal. You can sometimes rely on the opposing opinion. Yeah. There are times that you say, you know what, this is a complicated situation, and because we have others that hold differently, we can rely on them in this case. Not only, I was going to say Sfek Sfeka, which we're going to eventually Zat Hashem learn about, and Hefsed Merubeh situations, which I briefly talked about, where there's a tremendous financial loss. A big cow used to be a big financial loss. You know, I hear today you can go to Chino and get yourself a sheep for I think about $100 or less. You want to buy a sheep?
My own sheep.
Yeah.
A goat.
A goat? To eat or to have as a pet? Oh. Oh, the milk. Yeah, the milk is good. Anyway, so there used to be a big financial loss. The shochet would come, the poor man would come, this is his only cow, and then the rabbi would tell him, it's taref, what can he do? He has to sell it to the goy for a discounted price. Yeah, it's not worth the same. So they try to find every heter possible, if it existed, sometimes to allow. And remember what we spoke about. Koach de hetera is much stronger, adif, than koach de isura. It's very easy to say, asur, throw it out in the garbage. Machmir. No, that's no big deal, no big kunz, as they say in Yiddish. The kunz is to find a heter if it exists. This is also true with women. You know, a woman has a stain, the rabbi can say, or the one who analyzes, just go back and be a Niddah. You mean you're basically sentencing her and her husband to be away for 3-4 weeks maybe because of that. You have to be careful, especially when they don't have children yet. I mean, it can become very complicated, depending on what it is. And there are some women that have problems, you know, with having children because of the ovulation problem, the timing. So you really have to be familiar with the various details in Halakhot, and how can it be possible for nevertheless to be together less than 11-12 days apart? You know, today you have either the 11 or 12 days. Or what if she sees more blood than the average? I mean, there's all kinds of halakhot. So you have to see if there are other opinions that hold differently, that you can combine with various other heterim to allow a situation. That, of course, that's where halacha really becomes powerful. When you're able to build something and prove that something would be permissible. I'll give you a quick example. Are you all familiar with bishul akum?
Right, sort of.
Right. Basically, you cannot have a non-Jew cook for you, unless it's coffee, unless it's things that are not prestigious. Olel shulchan shemelachim, right? Things that cannot be eaten raw, right? So basically, meat and a cholent will be a problem. Can you ask a goy to make you cholent? And this question came about when I was in Yeshivat Torah Badat. Somebody asked me, it was a big question. Somebody had come late that Friday home, and the goy put up the cholent by themselves in a crock pot.
In a crock pot?
In a crock pot, it makes no difference. Crock pot.
Well, because a gas stove might have a...
Right. Very good. So you learned the halachot a little bit about it. Yeah, all right. Yeah.
Not sufficient.
Anyway, a crock pot makes it in some ways more complicated. But the goy cannot make cholent for you, chamim, right? Unless you're involved. What's the involvement? Depending if you're Sephardic or Ashkenazi. Either you put it on the fire, or you turn on the flame, or whatever. But they were not home. They came home late, and then they realized that the maid had made the cholent. What do we do now? What do you say? So this presents a question. Bishul akum is asur. There's no question about it. Not only is the food asur, the pot is taref.
Yeah, but they already came home.
Now they're home.
So?
Yeah, but it's not completely cooked yet.
Oh, so now you have to think.
So do you turn it off and turn it back on?
Okay, these are the questions. So these are the questions that need to be raised. How far was it cooked? What was there?
Right.
Potatoes and beans. These are things shelo oleh al shulchan shemelachim maybe. So we have a mixture of meat that is oleh al shulchan shemelachim with things that are not oleh al shulchan shemelachim. You have maybe a portion of the cooking that is not complete yet. In other words, it was initial stages of cooking. So maybe there is bishul achar bishul in bishul akum. Maybe you can recook it now. As long as it's not cooked enough, you can do it. Okay? The problem was, one second, it's before Shabbat still.
Oh, it's still before.
Now, the problem was, this is a crock pot, so there was no pilot light. If there would have been a pilot light, then it would have been okay for Ashkenazim at least.
Right.
Okay? So that made it more complicated. So in the end, my answer to them was that to of course, disconnect it and to reconnect it it was not cooked enough anyway.
Maybe add stuff in there.
No. And besides the fact that a lot of the foods inside, a lot of the items in there, like the potatoes and beans, are not oleh al shulchan shel melachim.
Right.
So there was a combination of ideas here that we could use to permit this, to save this Shabbat for Shabbat.
I didn't understand what.
Oleh al shulchan shel melachim. In order for a goy not to cook, it has to be a food item that does not go on the king's table. In other words, it's not a special food. Beans.
Prince Charles may have his own brand of popcorn.
Okay, yeah, all
But
right.
that does not make it
yeah.
all the shulchan
Yeah.
aruch. It's not the type of food you would expect
Right.
a king to eat.
Not
Right.
necessarily a king,
Yeah.
in a form,
Right.
in a wedding,
Right.
in a formal meeting.
Right.
In the formal meal, right?
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, there's more heterim. If you want to hear more, I mean, there's a heter of some Rishonim that hold that maids are not really goyim in the sense that we have to be concerned about as much. Even though we are almost, and even though we're machmir, we're strict. Of course, you can't allow any goyim to cook for you. But there is that opinion too. If you introduce this opinion plus this opinion plus that opinion plus the chokhmat adam, the chokhmat adam writes, I think that in Efsed Merubeh, you would be able to say okay. Right? So, in certain situations. So here, before Shabbat, there's maybe no time. So you see how I'm adding opinion after opinion to render a decision here on whether this is okay or not. Because if it's not okay, you have to make a brand new chart. And if you only have 15 minutes, it's still possible, by the way.
Right.
Does everybody here know why it's possible to cook something 15 minutes before Shabbat?
It's actually better that way because it's not.
One second. Do you know?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, that-
According to the
It's going to
halacha,
be done it's going to be done.
according to the halacha, it has to be done a certain amount before Shabbat.
That's only
Only
if it might be done by the evening meal for fear that will come and raise the fire
Right.
to make it nice and tasty. But if you
Okay.
put it in right before Shabbat,
and it's for tomorrow's
Right.
use.
and it has meat or takes very long to cook,
Right.
then there is no chance that the housewife will able to dream.
I
of
meant
And besides the fact, here you're going to be using a blech anyway.
the crock test itself of that.
In some ways, yeah.
And
So you
that's
see,
some-
so that's why that will not be a problem if you are very quick with your hands and just
I'm
to
not
throw in the new food. Yes.
I met someone who badafka just before Shabbos, just before his wife lit
Yeah.
candles, he specifically put a piece of raw meat into the chillet specifically for this purpose.
Yes.
The
Okay.
chillet may
Yeah.
have been 3/4 cooked, but
Yeah.
he put it raw meat in
Yeah,
there
but that
specifically for that.
yeah, but
purpose.
that by itself will not be
Right.
sufficient.
Right.
Yeah. So
It would-
it would not. No, you cannot just add a little bit more if it's
Right.
already fully cooked.
Right.
The whole it's a problem.
A half cooked, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
For what purpose?
Yeah.
To make sure that they're made?
No,
Yeah.
no,
All right,
no,
no,
no, no. To make sure that
Different story. We'll
Yeah.
talk about it later. To do.
So no, but I meant for that.
right, yeah.
To do it for the other reason,
Right.
for that would be okay.
Right.
All right. Anyway, this is a completely different topic.
Sorry.
Another time, Hilchot Shabbat and so forth. It's very fascinating. All right. We're talking about bitul b'shishim. Bitul b'shishim is a concept that we need a certain amount to cancel out the flavor, to dilute the taste, so it's no longer there. So we have various opinions as to when do we really need a kafela, the cook? Do we need him at all times? Do we need him together with the shiur? When do we have a kafela tasted, and when do we have shishim? So the simple answer is, when do you have shishim? The simple answer is,
Chef around.
there's nobody around. But you're gonna see soon that it's not necessarily so. According to Rashi, you need both. Lechatchila. Lechatchila, you need both. Now, let's see, what does really Rashi mean, that you need both? Sometimes there may be a flavor beyond 60. It may be strong. It's a strong flavor, and you may be able to feel it above 60. In that case, Rashi would hold it's not batel, especially if a kafela felt it, of course. I mean, how do you know that it's there? Because somebody felt it, somebody tasted it, right? So he therefore says like this: if there is flavor above 60, it would be a sur. Even though we say usually 60 is batel, when we say usually, we mean usually. Usually 60 is enough to render a flavor batel. But I'm letting you know, Rashi says that if there is more, if there is a flavor even beyond, above 60, it would still be a sur. Therefore, the kafela is a humrah. I need a kafela, just in case he finds flavor, and there's flavor above 60. I need two. But why do you need shishim for? Shishim is because most of the time, he says, the flavor is gone if there's 60 against it. What's the benefit of that? The benefit for that is that in case there's no kafela around, you can rely on that. But ideally, in lechatchila, you need both.
But if there is a kafela,
Why do you need both? Why do you need both again? Because of two things. Less than 60, I can't use the kafela, even though he doesn't taste it. It's less than 60. Okay? Above 60, if he still feels that, it's still asur. You see? So I need both.
so the kafela is only
It's a chumrah.
Is only
Yeah.
to identify and taste after 60.
Right. That plus, even if he were to taste it below 60, he wouldn't help me. In other words, he's there, obviously, because that's the way I'm going to determine if there's a flavor. So what's the shishim for? Shishim is in the event there's no kafela, and by the way, shishim is usually enough anyway, so I don't really have to be concerned if there's no kafela around.
Right.
I can trust that the majority of the time there will not be a flavor. So Rashi's shita here of shishim is shishim with kafela, that you need both.
Provided there's a kafela there.
Provided the kafela is there. If he's absent, I can trust the shishim. So the kafela, according to Rashi, is a chumrah. It's an additional chumrah. We're being strict here in demanding that, just because that's the way to resolve this lechatchila. How do I resolve it? Not with shishim. I'm going to use a kafela, lechatchila. That's the way I'm going to figure this out. And a lot of the opinions use that. I mean, if you have the kafela, you're going to use the kafela. We don't use kafela for other reasons. The Ramah at least says not to use it.
But if I understand, according
Yeah.
to Rashi, a kafela disqualified if I don't have. Is that
Right.
what you said?
Right.
So that I have to have shishim in order to save it.
Right.
Now that I have shishim, if there's a kafela, I need to consult with them.
Right. And what happens in case there's no kafela? Maybe there is a flavor above shishim. If there is, it will be a kalush flavor. It will be so weak that it would not be really that detectable anyway. So Rashi does agree with everybody as far as shishim being usually the standard that's necessary to cancel out a sur. But he requires a kafela. And he requires shishim. In other words, the two of them have to be. Why? Because under less than shishim, kafela would not help me.
We discount the possibility that
Yeah.
if there's no kafela,
The what?
if there's no kafela,
Right.
do we just simply that there will be a strong taste?
No, we don't suspect that there will be. Usually there isn't. We can be comfortable.
rely on the
We can be secure in our feeling that if there's 60, he's not going to feel anything anyway. But that's the way to resolve this. We need to kafela ideally to tell me if there is or there isn't. Yeah. If he's not around, I can use 60 by itself. That's the second option.
You're surprised.
Then it's asur. Then it's asur. If he says, "Oh, I still feel it," it's asur.
So is that called?
No. He's gonna feel.
The first taste.
You haven't tasted. No, you haven't tasted it yet.
No, he's kafela. There's
There's
no
no
kafela.
kafela.
Right. Oh, there's no kfela? Yeah. It
And
will.
now the person himself
Yeah.
tastes it, and there is a taste.
Right. It depends. We will see. It depends according to which sheet. According to Rashi, it's an honest form.
It's honest.
It's an honest by accident, but you wouldn't be able to use it. Yeah. So what is Rashi saying? Rashi's saying kapela without 60, 60 without kapela is worthless. 60 without a kapela, if you have no choice, you can rely on. Why? Because most of the time the issur will be gone by 60. All right. The majority of Rishonim, however, don't agree with this, including the Balei Tosafot. They hold, believe it or not, and this is something that maybe you wanted more clarity in this. Most of the Rishonim, including Balei Tosafot, they hold that any flavor above 60 is not a real flavor. Okay? It's just not. It's just not it. It's a tam kalush.
In other words, we need a certain standard that tam should ke'ikar.
Yeah.
Our problem is not
Right,
to do with the tam.
right,
Our problem is that the tam is ke'ikar.
Right.
So maybe we say that if it's if there's a taste above 6, such a taste does not qualify for tam ke'ikar.
For tam keikar. Yes,
How
pretty
does
much.
truma fit in?
Yeah. Let's be careful not to get into too many topics, otherwise we'll be here forever. Yes.
So then, how do
Whiskey?
Whiskey?
one
Why?
of the issues is that it's in the barrel?
In the barrels.
We use the barrel for shelf trade. So
Right.
now, some of them, and some of them put whiskey.
Right. Yeah.
The amount of whiskey in
Right.
the barrel,
Right.
if you think about it,
Right.
is going to be much more than 60 tons in the wood.
Right. That's a good question, and remind me, we'll talk about it when we actually talk about lach velach. and the eventual mixtures, even though we're talking about it, min, bemino, and we'll remind me, that's a good question. When it comes to wine, it's a little stricter. I'm just letting you know right now, it's pretty strict when it comes to wine.
I'm not in the front position on that.
No, right, but because it's a different topic, I'd rather leave it for another.
Okay.
Yeah, but remind me, and we'll bring it up another time, the problem with the whiskeys being made in barrels that may have the flavoring of wine. Okay? I did touch a little bit about isurim that are very minute, that are there, and the chorah should be kasher because they're batel. Forget about wine.
Right.
Even guava juice that may have carmine or coquino.
What is that?
It's made from a cat or made from a cockroach. Yeah, and there's some ingredients that come from whales. And you say, but wait a minute, it's not minus, but 0.005%. But it touches on, just real briefly, it touches on the issue of en mevatlin isur lechatchila. One of the issues, at least, concerning those minute amounts, is that you're not allowed to intentionally pour more and more and more so that you have a very, very small amount. Okay, so that's going to be one of the things we'll talk about when we come to en mevatlin isur lechatchila. Here it happened.
Does it make it there first and then you're done
No.
doing it?
No.
Or you're adding these things from the...
Well, obviously, if the isur is there to begin
I
with.
mean with the things that are made from the bugs or whatever.
Right.
They're adding that in
Yeah.
because then they're doing it for that
Yeah.
intentionally.
Okay. So we'll it's a separate topic, and we'll get to that with Hashem. Yeah. If I don't remember, remind me. Yeah. So the majority of the Rishonim would therefore hold that the above 60 is really not a flavor. And therefore, since it's not a flavor, guess what? You don't really need a ta'ima. You don't even need to taste it if it's above 60. Afuch, they hold that the whole idea of kafela here is a kula, not a chumrah. Which means that if there is no flavor under 60, that's when the kafela will help me.
Uh-huh.
Why am I using the kafela? Kafela is a kula, not a chumrah. The whole idea of kafela is in case you don't have 60 and you don't feel the flavor, he just saved the day for you. You follow that? The kafela saved the day. There's no 60. There's 30. And there are certain things that are not, maybe they're gone after 30, 40 times as much. So the kafela is doing you a favor here. He's a kula, not a chumrah like Rashi. And therefore, you'll use him just to determine if there's flavor under 60. Above 60, I don't need him. Right? According to the Ri, in every situation, therefore, you can rely on the kafela, even if there's less than 60. If there's 60 or more, you don't even need him. Bechlal. Okay? According to, that was the Ri, right? The Ri and the Rosh are basically of the opinion that above 60, there's no real tam, and therefore, we don't really need a kafela in the event that we know for sure we have 60. Here's the chidush. And just in case you did get him to taste it, and he tells you, well, I taste something, you ignore what he says. You ignore what he says if you have 60, according to them. Because he's not there to be machmir, he's there to be mekel. That's it.
He's not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So when do...
Wait.
Yeah.
So now he told you there is a top. So you're going to ignore it.
We're going to ignore if it's right. If
But
there's
you know,
if there's above, if there's 60 or
If
more,
it's above 60,
Yeah.
you know when you got it in your mouth now that there's going to be a tom.
Makes no difference.
Do they hold that if even
No.
if there's a tom above 60,
No.
you can eat it?
no, you could. It's not a problem.
So for them, if it's above 60, even if there is a tom, you can eat it because the tom is cut.
Right. The time is kalush for
The
sure.
tom cake.
Yeah, it's a very, very minute time. They hold that there's no such a thing as real time after 60. Okay? And if you do detect something, it's not a real time. And therefore, the whole idea of kafela is only when you have less than 60. Rashi, of course, holds it's a chumrah. He goes to, according to his shita, that anything above 60 would be a sur. Therefore, in other words, if it still gives a flavor, it will be a sur. The Ramban makes a distinction. He's in between Rashi and the other shitot. The Ramban seems to be saying that if you have only the tam of the isur, but not the whole isur in the pot, then it would be okay to use a kapela, and even under 60, if he doesn't feel anything, the whole idea of tam, according to him, is a chumrah. In other words, you're basically just going by the flavor. You don't have the real isur here. You need 60 against the whole thing. No, he says, if you don't feel the flavor under 60, to the use of a kafela, that's fine. But once you have the whole isur inside, even though you don't see it, then he would hold like Rashi. He would hold that you would need to have a kafila, you would need to, and if you feel the time even above 60, it would be a sur. Very much like Rashi, but he makes a distinction of what do you actually have in the spot. Just a little bit of flavoring, or do you actually have the whole isud disintegrated in the pot, the substance itself. That's a very interesting distinction. The Ramban, yeah. Yeah, Ramban with a nun, right. Obviously, if you have 60, you don't need to look for a kafela. But if you were to taste it and the real isur was there, then it would not be good. So he's in between the two, depending what is in it, just the tam or the isur. What about the Rambam? The Rambam is very interesting. The Rambam says, you know what? All the shiurim that the rabbis gave us, they were only intended when you don't have a kafela. Okay? So therefore the Rambam says, really the way to resolve this problem is with a cook, a non-Jewish cook, a kafela, and whatever he says will be the rule. If he says there is flavor, I don't care how much amount you have, it's a surah. If he says there's no flavor, even if you have half, there's 30, not 60, it's mutar. And guess what? The Mechaber goes like the Rambam here. So the Mechaber holds like the Rambam, that once the kafela tells you there's no flavor, I don't care what the amount is. If the kafela says, I feel it, I don't care that there is 60 either. Okay? So you see how this is also a different shita. And this is the halacha based on the mechaber. Everything will be determined. Now, what happens if I don't have a kafela? Well, everybody's in agreement. You go by 60. Right. Like the Rambam says, all the shiurim is for what purpose? When they don't have a kafela. If I have a kafela, he's going to make the decision whether less or more. That's all. And that's what the mechaber goes by. So this covers the main ideas of this first seif. I just want to finish with maybe one or two more points, and that is about tasting. Tasting an isser is asr, even though you're just tasting a little bit. You're not really eating the whole thing. You just want to taste a little bit. See if it tastes like pork. It's asur, right? Tasting is asr. But there are times that the halacha permits it. I don't think you would have covered it. Yeah, a little bit you may have seen it in Basar bechalav, and I'll talk about it soon. But unless you learn Hilchot Terefot, you won't come across it. Hilchot Melicha, you'll see it too. There's two cases, one in Melicha and one in Terefot. In Terefot, there's an interesting situation. What happens if the gallbladder is missing? There's a problem in Terefot. When you're missing something, it's taref, something that you have to have. Unless you can do without. Some things you can do without. Gallbladder, But nevertheless, it's a problem. It's a problem. The reason why sometimes you can get away with not seeing a gallbladder is because there's a great likelihood that the liver absorbed it all. Somehow it became part of the liver. They're close to each other.
Or absorbed the gallbladder.
The gallbladder, yeah. And how do you know that? You taste the liver, if it's bitter or not. Mara, as it's called in Hebrew, is called mara because it's bitter.
Right.
So you taste. You put your tongue and to feel. If it's there, you'll feel it. There's various scenarios there. If you see part of it, you don't see all of it. Is it really gone? Is it absorbed? One way to determine if it's there, and which would mean that it's kasher, is that if you can feel the bitterness in the liver. Without getting into too much details, because it's ilchot terefot, this is a heter that's used over there. Why is that permissible? Because it's a lick. A lick with the tongue is not actually tasting it, not actually for sure not swallowing it. And a lick perhaps would be permissible based on that.
Are we required to spit it out?
Well, not really. Okay. Not really, because it's nothing.
Right.
It's just a lick. Right. Now, even though many of the poskim don't say that is permissible lechatchila, because it's still an isur, but it's definitely possible. If necessary, it could be done. So I gave you this one example just to show you that there's a difference also between licking and tasting. Now, why can't we just lick over here? Here you can't just lick. Here you can't have a Jew taste it, because in order to really taste it, you actually need livloa, to swallow it. There's a question, however, amongst the poskim whether the goy needs to swallow it all the way, or can he gulp it into his mouth and then spit it out. That's another diyun, another discussion amongst the poskim, is what exactly does the goy need to do this kafela in order to determine? Could he actually determine it with just a little bit of a sip? You have to really drink it, swallow it. What if he just puts it in his mouth and then out. Would he be able to detect it or not? So these are questions that if you really have the time, you want to go into it. There's some discussions about that, brief discussions about whether that would be sufficient for him to feel it or not. Another case of basar maluach. You got a piece of meat that you bought at the butcher. You don't really know if he salted it or not, because this guy has a bad reputation. Unfortunately, some butchers have had very bad reputations. It's a big yetzer hara to be a butcher. Rabbis tells the Gemara, Tov shebatabachim legehenom. The best butchers will end up in Gehenom. Why? It's a big, the big yetzer hara. My father-in-law, Alav Shalom, was a butcher. He was a very honest man, a good man. And Taikarta Otolo, Mr. Bastamsky, very, very nice man. And he told me all the tricks, what others do, not him. And he said, Mamash, they used to mix, all kinds of meats, and sometimes they would mix taref, and just to make an extra buck. And unfortunately, we heard it recently, what happened. I don't want to say where, but you heard the big scandal of how somebody was selling taref for an entire community for many years. Somebody who was very learned. And because of the Yetzer Hara, we don't understand it, but some people have this weakness for money, and it drives them crazy. So I don't want to talk too much about that. But anyway, so you suspect this meat, was this salted or not? If it's not salted, I can't have it. Can I lick it? If it's been salted, it will be salty. Kosher meat is always a little bit saltier than non-kosher meat. Not that I've tasted that, but I'm told, because there's a salt, it tastes saltier because they salt it. So can you? So some say you would be able to lick it. Of course, all it is a lick. What's the problem? The problem is if there is, there can be blood there, still left over. So that was the concern about whether you can lick it or not. So some say you shouldn't really do it. But can you? You can, because the licking is not as a problem. Okay, let's just finish up with the Ramah. The Ramah says that even though this is a great solution, get a kafela and figure out if this is kasher or not, we don't use kafela anymore. We don't rely on goyim anymore. We only use 60. Why? Why does the Ramah say, why not? This is great. Everybody says it's fine. Some say this is the way to do it. There's Mirtat, he's afraid for his reputation. Get him to do it. Quick way, quick fix. There are various explanations offered. One explanation offered of why the Ramah says let's do away with it, we're not going to do it anymore, with a non-Jew that is because either the Ramah was concerned with all the Shittot, and some Shittot are contradictory, are strict where one is lenient. Right? So since he's concerned about all the Shittot, with the stricter Shittot, about the taste, what if there's above 60, just all the ones who are strict, he'd rather not use it. Then you also have Masiach Lefi Tumo. That's a big question in itself. Can we really use a Masiach Lefi Tumo in something that may be Deoraita? It's a problem. It hasn't really been so simple that just to apply Masiach Lefi Tumo. And some say that kafela lo shachiach, a kafela is not always around. Go fetch somebody. You try to find a goy shel Shabbat. Sometimes it's not easy. So go find a kafela now to figure it out. It's not just a goy, a kafela. So here we have kafela, we have Masiach Lefi Tumo. We have issues that are not so clear. It's not so simple. Just use 60. 60 appears to be something that everybody's pretty much in agreement with, even though we need the kafela according to some shito. But everybody says that b'diavad for sure, 60 will always be good, especially since we know 60 is an amount that usually cancels out anyway all flavors.
So is this a case where through usage it becomes...
Yes,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Now, the Ramah says you can't use a goy. Can I use a Jew? Where would you use a Jew? There are times that you can use a Jew to taste something. And for that, we go back to Basar B'Chalav. Remember in Basar B'Chalav, what happens if you cut a radish with a meat knife? Can you eat that radish with milk? Right. So you would have to remove a little bit. You'd have to peel off a little bit. Depends how much you cut. What? No, over there's something else. The Mechaber says, no. The Mechaber says nothing about it. The Mechaber just says, and at least another option, he says, just taste it. If you don't feel any meat flavor in it, go ahead. It's okay. The question is if it's lechatchila or b'di'evet, that's a really different situation, whether you should do it anyway. But technically, you should be able to eat it with milk, because if there's no flavor, there's no flavor. And this is a heter. This is not an isur. This is meat that's kosher. You can taste it yourself. You don't need a goy. So according to some, perhaps the Ramah would allow there a Jew to taste it. It appears to be, I think from the Shah seems to be saying that it's obvious from the Ramah and from various places that he would not even agree to that. Lechatchila. But that's lechatchila only. Lechatchila he would not agree to use a Jew, even though he says here a goy. He really did not only mean a goy, he meant the whole idea of te'ima, of the tasting. We're not such good tasters. Or for whatever other reason. So even there where it's heter, where you can use a Jew, he says don't use it. Take off a piece, and if you really want to have it with your lasagna, if you really want to have with Melicha, with dairy. So some are strict, and again, Mechaber says you would be able to taste it. What does the Kabbalah have to say? Kabbalah speaks about bitul. The Zohar speaks about bitul too. A different kind of bitul. The bitul hayesh, the bitul hametziut, in a person's ego.
Right.
That's the kind of bitul that Kabbalah speaks about, and how a person has to continuously work on being mevatel the yesh in him, as though, to get rid of the ego, to basically, in order for an individual, the Kabbalah explains, to be able to draw from the or, from the Shekinah, from the light, from the Shefa, Eloki, there has to be a certain bitul in him that will enable that. Otherwise, it doesn't happen so easily. And this concept of bitul, of course, I like to apply it here too, because what is bitul really telling us, especially according to the Rosh? I'm getting rid of something that was originally taref, tameh, and basically I'm able now to eat it because there's a bitul of its existence. The highest form of bitul is a bitul of the mitziut, not of the yesh. The highest bitul, the Kabbalah says, is a bitul of the actual mitziut, not of just the yesh. The yesh is a continuous work that I do all the time to be mevatel the yesh. But the bitul of the mitziut, of the essence, that's on a very, very high level. And that's what really happens here too. That once I apply an amount of 60, which is also Kabbalistic, by the way. What's 60? You'll find many, many terms in the Torah that use 60. The sleep is 1/60th of death. Shabbat is 1/60th of Olam Haba. Fire is 1/60th of Gehenom. So you see, there's an interesting correlation here in Ma'amarei Chazal with the number 62. But here we're talking pure chemistry. It seems to be diluting the flavor. But in reality, what is happening is, the Torah is telling us this is a solution. Majority rules. Majority has a tremendous koach of getting rid of something as though it would not exist all the time. I think we'll stop over here. Continue next time.